Hello and welcome to the Glenscope channel. Today's fleeting target is Bill Blair, the Public Safety Minister of Canada. He has a tendency to do a lot of TV segments. He likes to pop in, pop out, and stick to his talking points. Sometimes he's challenged, but he normally gets around it just by over-talking people or just avoiding the question entirely. Okay, so who is Bill Blair? Bill Blair was a police officer for 40 years. He was the police chief of Toronto for 10 years between 2005 and 2015, in which he became the Public Safety Minister of Canada. During 2010 was probably his most controversial year, in which the G20 summit was held in Canada, and he was tasked with maintaining order. So in doing so, he had requested the Liberal government of Ontario to pass an Order in Council of Ontario, sound maybe a little bit familiar, to basically suspend rights around the small section where the summit was being held, in which case police could basically operate with immunity. They could arrest anyone they want to without probable cause. They could, there was a lot of beatdowns basically dished out, is basically the history of this, of 2010. So now this is the same guy that is the head of public safety in Canada, which is a little bit ironic. Anyway, so let's go ahead and get to the first interview.
A doubling of gang-related gun violence in the last 5 years, a 5% increase in shootings in Toronto over the past year. There has been a spike here in the city recently. Something needs to be done, and we can all agree on that. Ottawa now trying to help out, pledging $54 million to fight gun and gang-related crime here in Ontario, across the province. Federal Crime Reduction Minister Bill Blair joins us now to talk a little bit more about the announcement which was made in Peel yesterday and how that money will be spent. Minister, thank you for joining us this morning. Let's talk a little bit about the money. How much is earmarked for Toronto and the GTA?
Well, that's entirely up to the province to determine. The federal government has made available a total of $347 million across Canada over a 5-year period. But when we came to Ontario in the spring and announced $11 million, which gave to the province to distribute to police services and to communities across Ontario. But we can still see a great deal of concern among Ontarians.
Okay, so Bill Blair has pledged $54 million over 3 years, starting from 2019, and then there was also the $347 million across all of Canada over 5 years. Now, that sounds like a lot of money, but let's do a little bit of math and we'll break it down. $347 million over 10 provinces. Now, some provinces are probably going to get more or less, but it works out to an average of $6 million per province. Now, that doesn't even include the territories. So let's say it's $6 million. That, if you account for each officer being, it takes about $150,000 to actually fund one officer because you need their equipment, their cars, training, that kind of stuff. It's going to take a little bit of money. So that $6 million is only worth about 40 officers worth of actual, and that's over five years, and then they would not have that budget anymore. Plus the 54 million currently on the screen over 3 years, and that's I'm not sure if it's specifically about Ottawa or about Toronto, but let's say it's about Toronto only. That's $18 million. That's actually a decent amount. So if you have $18 million plus the $6 million, that's $24 million. And Bill Blair announces that they just sent over like another $1 million. So let's say $25 million. That is 166 additional possible officers worth of funding. Now, again, that sounds like a lot of work. Like, that they're really trying to help. But if you don't already know, the Toronto Police Department is 4,800 officers. And that's like the actual officers, plus they have another 2,800 support staff. They have like $1 billion budget. So this works out to about a 3% increase. Like, this is almost a rounding error worth of funding. So when they say they're pledging that they want to resolve this issue, if you break down the numbers, that doesn't seem to be the case.
About the increase in gun violence that's taking place, and particularly in the GTA, certainly here in Toronto. And so we've worked out with the province to accept another $54 million in federal funding, which they're responsible now for.
So Bill Blair just said the term gun violence. I think what he actually means is gang violence. So gang on target, gang on gang, territory fighting, that kind of thing. It is a pretty big problem, especially in Toronto, because they had two separate instances of two broad daylight shootings. Anyway, those suspects haven't been caught, by the way. They're still at large. Presumably, they're still armed.
To municipalities, to police services, but also to a number of other significant initiatives that are taking place in community that can reduce the incidence of violence across our communities. This is in addition to the important work that police and communities are already doing. But certainly those additional resources will be very helpful. I'm certain. I've come from that world. Frankly, in the 10 years I was police chief here, I can't recall a single incidence of that type of support coming from the federal government. And
so Bill Blair really likes to use the term like reduce violence, reduce instances, those kinds of soft languages, especially when he's talking about providing support, even if the support amounts to like a 3% increase. We're not focusing on the underlying problem.
That's why we've worked very hard with the provinces and municipalities to make a difference.
To make a difference? How? How are you going to make a difference with a 3% rounding error worth of funding?
We've been working very closely with the province. The province has a process of determining how that money will be spent, and we all want to get the best value for it.
Okay, so what he's doing here is shifting blame. He's saying that the federal government is just providing the funds to the provinces. The provinces handle the real money. But when it inevitably fails, and it will, then it's the province's fault. It's not the federal government's fault.
At the same time, we know that there's an urgency, and people have real concerns about safety in our communities. I think it's also important to mention, Roger, that the investment we're making in these types of law enforcement initiatives that will improve investigations and prosecutions are not the only investments that are being made, need to be made. We've got to invest in communities. We've got to invest in kids. We've got to create hope and opportunity in our neighborhoods so the kids will make better choices than joining a gang.
So what Bill Blair is doing right now is called buzzword salad. It's basically just nonsense. It means there's no actual real substance. There's no person talking right now. This is literally just fancy words from a script that he has just memorized and said 1,000 times.
And those investments have begun and been ongoing for us for the last 4 years.
Where would you like to see the money go? I know this is down to the province, but where would you like to see the money go here? I mean, you were the chief here.
I'll tell you, from experience, I believe cops count. I've got countless experiences in my police career here in Toronto that when I sent well-trained, properly supervised, and properly resourced police officers into a difficult situation in a neighborhood, they could make that neighborhood feel and be safer.
So definitely this is a hindsight 2020 type of question, because right now the police training is in serious question. The average police officer only will get between 2 to 4 hours of basic hand-to-hand training and another 2 to 4 hours of actual live fire training. So essentially 1 workday worth of training per year. So there is a significant gap in training. As well as for the second comment regarding making communities safe, well, it makes some communities feel safe, Bill Blair. Not all communities.
All of the ways in which guns currently are getting into the hands of criminals. And, we know that some of them are being smuggled across the border, a significant number of them. And so we've already made significant investments, nearly $89 million into the RCMP and CBSA to tighten and improve our border security to keep those guns out. We've also invested in the investigations into the organized crime groups responsible for bringing those guns. We also know a lot of guns are being stolen from legitimate gun owners, and unfortunately some gun owners are legally purchasing and selling them. And so, those are essentially the three ways. And so we are looking at every option.
Okay, so most illegal guns come from the USA. We already know this. It's between 70 and 80%. The other 20 to 30% are stolen or sourced or straw purchases or whatever, and those should 100% be tracked. But I have a question to pose to Bill Blair. So, Bill Blair, you wish to go after the criminals, I assume, to actually collect these illegal weapons. But you can't even catch people who shoot other people in broad daylight in Toronto. So, what is your plan to actually secure our cities exactly?
and everything that can be done to make it more difficult for criminals to gain access to guns.
We all want criminals to have less access to guns. I'll give you an example. The Danforth shooter had an illegally stolen gun from a gun store, but they ignore the fact that at the home of the Danforth shooter, there was an additional 33 firearms. So it wasn't for lack of guns. Like criminals can get guns very easily, extremely easily.
Additional requirements with respect to storage, for example, or more immediate and better interventions. If somebody represents a danger to themselves, if they're suicidal, or they're in a bad domestic situation, or they're online spouting hate, and there's a strong indication that they represent a risk, we want to be to ensure that the authorities can take immediate and effective action to render that situation safe, to make sure that that individual does not have an access to any firearms. And so we believe that there are some very positive steps that we can and must take. I'm very confident that Canadians will have a choice.
Okay, so first point, safe storage laws. There are already safe storage laws in Canada. I don't want to rehash that. Red flag laws in terms of possible threats, either domestic or, someone might be a danger to themselves. Those are already in Canada. And it's funny that he's sort of like in the middle of it. He says immediate effective action for, law enforcement to sort of take that. Where was the immediate law enforcement action on the Nova Scotia shooter? He was notified 3 times with illegal firearms. Who can be trusted to actually do the job? I don't know, but at the end of the day, Bill Blair did stick to his talking points. That's what he's paid to do. He avoided any kind of real question. So if you want more failed solutions, then definitely keep allowing Bill Blair to work in the public safety minister slot. Otherwise, stay tuned for the next video. I'm mixing it up a lot, just sort of seeing what works, and let me know in the comments sort of how you feel about sort of this kind of style. I will be going after a few more of the Bill Blair interviews. I got some juicy ones lined up. Anyway, guys, I will see you in the next one. Thank you all for watching.